to meeting number 59 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging this meeting is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. I myself am participating today from the traditional unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, February 3rd, 2023, the committee resumed its study of the effects of the withdrawn amendments G4 and G46 to Bill C-21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments firearms. Today we have two panels of witnesses. We'll deal firstly with the first one. So for the first hour with us in person, or with you in person, we have from the Mohawk Council of Kanawaki, Chief Jessica Lazar. And by video conference, we have from the Gwich'in Tribal Council, we have Grand Chief Ken Kavaichuk, Gwich'in Tribal Council, and I apologize to everyone for misspeaking your name. I'll do my best, but thank you. Each of you will have up to 5 minutes to make opening remarks, after which we'll proceed with rounds of questions. So welcome. I now invite Grand Chief Kavaichuk to make an opening statement. Please go ahead, sir. 5 minutes.
Trengweenzi, good afternoon, honorable committee members. My name is Ken Kikavichik, and I am the Grand Chief of the Gwich'in Tribal Council of the Northwest Territories. I was elected in September of 2020 for a 4-year term, and I am here speaking on behalf of the over 3,500 participants to our Gwich'in Comprehensive Land Claim Agreement, a modern treaty that we signed with Canada in April of 1992. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee on this very important topic. We, the Gwich'in, are the most northerly First Nations people in North America. We are part of the Athapaskans, which includes the Slavey, the Clichon, Hun, Tachoni, Apache, Navajo, and other groups in Canada and the United States. The Gwich'in reside in 11 different communities stretching from the interior of Alaska through northern Yukon and into the Mackenzie Valley of the Northwest Territories of Canada. For millennia, our Gwich'in Nation have lived a nomadic and subsistence lifestyle, largely following the porcupine caribou herd. We coexisted with these vital resources by following our values of honor, kindness, laughter, our stories, honesty and fairness, sharing and caring, and last but certainly not least, respect. This value of respect is where I'll be focusing my presentation. It is the basis of the perspective of the Gwich'in Tribal Council on the proposed amendments as contemplated through Bill C-21 and the current federal government strategy on firearms. As we are all acutely aware, successive massacres including Ecole Polytechnique in 1989, Concordia University in 1992, Vernon, BC in 1996, and more recently Mayerthorpe in 2005, Parliament Hill in 2014, and Nova Scotia in 2020, resulted in the tragic loss of officers of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and other Canadian citizens. It is the individuals who committed these atrocious murders that are to blame for the senseless acts of violence. Mental wellness, misogyny, and criminal intent were behind these tragedies. However, it was access to some of the firearms specifically mentioned in the draft legislation, such as handguns and automatic assault-style rifles, that should concern us all. Therefore, we are of the view that the proposed amendments in Bill C-21 do not go far enough in the license revocations for known or potential assailants through the red and yellow flag laws. Our suggestion would be an automatic 60-day suspension for those with a yellow flag and a 90-day suspension for those that have been red flagged. This is particularly important in situations involving domestic violence. Simply put, the Gwich'in Tribal Council supports the restriction of high-powered automatic assault weapons that are generally utilized in military applications. Far too often, some of these weapons have completely overwhelmed the authorities that we depend upon for our public safety. We cannot allow this to continue to happen. This is the very reason I'm here to present today. For our Gwich'in Nation, we need to balance the public interest with the Treaty Crown partnership that was established with our organization to ensure the continued exercise of our harvesting rights, throughout our established territory in the Gwich'in settlement region, which totals some 90,000 square kilometers. The essential firearms that we require to exercise our inherent and treaty rights are typically bolt or lever action rifles or pump action shotguns. The rifles, such as a 243, 270, 308, 3030, 30-06, or 6.5 caliber Creedmoor, are typically used for larger animals such as caribou, moose, or bear, where 12-gauge shotguns are generally used for migratory birds such as ducks and geese. Smaller rifles such as 22 caliber, at times semi-automatic versions, and 410 caliber or 20-gauge shotguns are used for smaller game such as rabbits, muskrats, and grouse. Our people require weapons that are durable to withstand our Arctic conditions, that provide protection from foreign objects such as sand, mud, and willows, while also being able to be easily transported on snowmobiles or in boats along the expansive river systems of the Nukwajonjik, Mackenzie River, Tedlit, Gwinjik, Peel River, or the Mackenzie Delta, the Northwest Territories. SKS and other long-range rifles and semi-automatic shotguns have been listed on the proposed amendments from December of 2022. These are common across our communities, specifically the Lee Enfield 303 caliber rifles, which are known as Ranger guns, as they historically have been distributed to our participants belonging to the Canadian Rangers. These specific models will require review, as I explained in a call that I participated in with Minister Mendocino on January 31st, along with other Indigenous leaders from across the Northwest Territories. If some of these models are to be listed under this legislation, then a practical and proper process for a buyback program would be of interest to our participants and communities to compensate for any loss that may result from the passing of this potential legislation. We would also be interested in potential exemptions for certain models that are critical, as mentioned earlier, to Gwich'in hunting and stewardship. We do not question the intent of these amendments. However, there's a clear requirement for continued engagement and consultation with Indigenous nations such as the Gwich'in, and more broadly, Canadians at large. People are passionate about this issue because for many Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians, the respectful harvesting of this country's natural resources, along with the ability to traverse our great lands with pride and safety, constitutes some of our basic needs and human rights, along with those rights enshrined by our treaties or established at common law. There does, however, need to be a proper balance of public safety with our rights to exercise this privilege, to coexist in these habitats that we all call home. Yeah. With that, I'd like to say hi, thank you for your time and opportunity to present today.
Thank you, Grand Chief. We go now to Chief Lazare for your opening statement. Please go ahead. 5 minutes, please.
Sego Sewagwego, they are just a guate your jets, Gahnawage ni Dewagenu. I am Chief Jessica Lazar of the Mohawk Council of Gahnawage. Yunakera Digan Igas. I'm happy to be here. I'm here to present our position on your proposed bill. We cannot overemphasize how integral hunting and harvesting is to our identity, and today I will present examples of how this bill will affect the ability to express that. There are potential repercussions on our rights to carry out a deeply rooted cultural practice, which is already restricted with the existing framework. I will also call in the lack of consultation with Indigenous communities and the effects of this deficiency in creating your bill. Harvesting is deeply woven into the Ganyagihaga Mohawk culture and the fabric of who we are. As Ungwehue, meaning original people, we have inherent practices that we've been engaging in since time immemorial. These practices are deeply ingrained in our ceremonies. They stem from inherent roles and responsibilities that are integrated into who we are from a generational and family level from birth. 6 years ago, my son was named in a naming ceremony.
Point of order. Point of order, Chair.
Point of order. I'm sorry, who's speaking?
C'est Christina, Monsieur.
It's Christina, Chair. I'm not hearing any interpretation into French for our witnesses' remarks.
Very well. Mr. Clerk, if you could look into that.
Yes, 1 second.
Madame Michaud, avez-vous...
Ms. Michaud, can you hear it now?
Avez-vous écouté...
Would you like the witness to start over? Yes, if the witness could start over, because it is working now. Thank you.
I believe it should work now.
Merci. So Chief Lazare, if you wouldn't mind, please start from the top.
Wadu. So they are just a Guate Yajats. I am from Kahnawake, the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake, and I am here to present our position on your proposed bill. We cannot overemphasize how integral hunting and harvesting is to our identity, and today I will present examples of how this bill will affect the ability to express that. There are potential repercussions on our rights to carry out a deeply rooted cultural practice, which is already restricted within the existing framework. I will also call in the lack of consultation with Indigenous communities and the effects of this deficiency in creating your bill. Harvesting is deeply woven into the Kanien'kehá:ka culture and fabric of who we are. As Ungwehue, meaning original people, we have inherent practices that we have been engaging in since time immemorial. These practices are deeply ingrained in our ceremonies and stem from inherent roles and responsibilities that are integrated into who we are from a generational and family level from birth. 6 years ago, my son was named in a naming ceremony. His name was raised and words were spoken, letting him know that when the time comes, his uncles will teach him our ways and to take on our inherent roles and responsibilities and take him hunting on the land. He has potential to be a father, to provide for a family, and be supported by the other men in his family to fulfill this role. In our culture, we are taught to balance the roles and responsibilities as humans with those of the other living beings here on Mother Earth. All this inherent knowledge and understanding is what we carry day to day. This understanding of our roles, responsibilities, and the respect for the cycle of life is what makes us who we are as Ungwehue. This cycle and balance has been interrupted by colonization, which has also established an evolution of our practices, from bows and arrows to firearms, in order to fulfill our obligations in sustaining that balance. At the same time, the development of lands has had a cumulative impact on the hunting locations, which are now more isolated, affecting migration paths, which have decreased breeding areas and provides detrimental change to ecosystems. Losing culture through restrictions of our rights is not a theoretical. This loss has been lived in real time by me and my family, as well as my community and those of my sister communities of the Iroquois Caucus. The restrictions on our rights under the current licensing structure are already unacceptable, and further restrictions could be fatal to our cultural practices. Urban sprawl and buildup around Kahnawake means we cannot hunt where we live, nor can we travel with our appropriate firearms to hunt in Jawarodu, a hunting territory located in the Laurentians that is shared with Kanesatake. We often must drive many hours and take time off work managing yearly harvest under severe time constraints. This bill and its amendments will further limit the potential for our families to harvest for sustenance during each crucial harvesting cycle. It will impact both our hunting methods and our success rate. When you start to interfere with that success, you interfere with food security and how that person can provide sustenance to their communities and families. In this context, and speaking from experience, I know that the possibility of firing successive shots can make the difference between downing an animal that will feed my family through the winter and injuring an animal that may at best take hours to track, or at worst result in an injured animal dying in the woods and wasted meat. We understand that some of the firearm prohibitions and suspensions include a sustenance exception, requiring that firearms remain available to individuals who demonstrate that they need a firearm to hunt. However, we would like to point out that those exceptions fall short in acknowledging and respecting the reality of the people from my community as well as those from the Iroquois Caucus. The realities of Indigenous people who travel for sustenance harvesting with their firearms are being overlooked due to the lack of consultation. Your government needs to take the time to ensure that there is recognition and acknowledgements made to reflect our Indigenous rights and our realities. Systemic racism in policing is also an issue for many Indigenous communities. Exemptions are only accessible when other law enforcement are properly trained to understand our reality. Impacts of the provincial and federal failure to educate outside police forces are already felt by community members who face problems such as establishing and documenting their rights as sustenance harvesters and transporting firearms for hunting in other parts of Canada. There is no carve-out in Bill C-21 for the exercise of our inherent jurisdiction rights, nor was any consultation carried out to solicit our input. There is no recognition of the way existing prohibitions and licensing already limit and have adverse impacts on our rights, and no attempt made to help us determine which specifications or models need to be protected, ensuring that there is a balance between safety and sustenance. With this, the Iroquois Caucus requests a meeting with the committee. It is for the Kanien'kehá:ka of Kahnawake, not for Canada, to decide what is fitting for our people. We have entrusted enforcement to the Kahnawake peacekeepers. I'd also like to point out that this bill will place an administrative burden on our peacekeepers who already face chronic underfunding, understaffing, and intransigence regarding our proposals for culturally appropriate firearm control. Concurrently, the lack of in-depth and comprehensive consultation with Indigenous communities is demonstrated in the incoherence and inconsistency of this bill, the proposed amendments therein, and the lack of acknowledgement on the rights of Indigenous peoples. The retracted amendments would have prohibited a broad spectrum of hunting rifles, shotguns, and other long guns used by our hunters. And evergreen definitions may not be any better. They would curtail our ability to access new developments in firearms, as other witnesses have already pointed out. Even a cursory review of the retracted amendments reveals important inconsistencies in the firearms selected for the inclusion. So you see, when you talk about firearms as objects, you forget that it's the person holding it that makes it either a tool for sustenance or a weapon. We ask that you address the real underlying problems that cause gun violence, not further restrict Indigenous peoples from carrying out their lives in a sustainable, ceremonial, and generational way. Find a way to support firearm safety training, find a way to support awareness against gun violence, and address the mental health issues that lead to gun violence. Help in demonstrating that when handling the power of a firearm comes great responsibility. Tony Wanege.
Thank you, Chief. We will start our rounds of question now with Mr. Motz. Mr. Motz, please go ahead. 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Chief Lazar. I think that's probably one of the best testimonies that's honest, real, and speaks to the issues that we have been talking about with this bill. So thank you for that plain look at how it impacts you and your community. I want to take you back to a comment you made early on in your introduction about basically your Indigenous exemptions under the Ordering Council that came in May of 2020. Now, we know that this government is particularly bad at legislation, and now I understand that, you know, the Liberals will sometimes say the right thing, but making it happen is a different issue when it comes to actually getting the job done. So, case in point, the Ordering Council of May of 2020 took away Indigenous firearms that were used for sustenance hunting. And then the Liberals paraded out this exemption that they talked about, an amnesty, if you will, respecting Indigenous rights under Section 35. Now, there's limitations of that, however, and you touched on it briefly. And I just want to, I won't read the whole thing, but one of the things that the excerpt talks about in the actual act talks about if specific firearm was, on April 30th of 2020, non-restricted firearm, used it for hunting in the exercise of a right recognized and affirmed by Section 35 of the Act, of a Constitution Act of 1982, or sustenance hunting, the person or their family, they can use that firearm until they are able to obtain another firearm for that use, which is really, to me, it seems to be a cop-out. The Liberals are really... they give you a juicy talking point. There's no substance that it violates, to me, potentially violates Section 35 with that little, one little short sentence in there. And it puts Indigenous hunters at risk for being criminalized if they're caught with a firearm when they could have possibly, taken a prohibited firearm previously now and not bought a new one. What are your thoughts on that? How do you address that with your community, and have your Indigenous hunters from your community addressed that as a concern to you?
So it definitely is a concern, as I've brought it to it today. Anyway, I was only given 5 minutes to speak on it. However, when it comes to the criminalization of these weapons, like I've mentioned, it's really difficult to prove that we have the right to the weapons. The permitting, especially in Quebec, for my community, it's located in Quebec, the permitting is not consistent. It is non-functioning at this moment. I know that there are a few of them waiting for their pals, waiting for different permits in order to hold different weapons, and also the essence of family hunting as well. So there's limits as well on the kind of gun that you can have, or the kinds of gun, or the numbers of weapons that you can have. So if families go hunting together, they cannot travel together because there are limits with that. And it affects the day-to-day day to day, but the present practices that we have in hunting.
And I also thank you for that. I also appreciated your explanation in regards to how the act, as proposed in C-21, really doesn't impact public safety. It goes after the wrong issue. It impacts your community as Indigenous hunters. It impacts, sport shooters and hunters and farmers across the country. And one of the things that I have seen recently is the government in Quebec is spending, some money to deal with some of those issues that they find to be the problem, the real problem, which is smuggling from across the U.S., from the U.S. into Canada, and they're spending, over $6 million over a number of years to try and make that happen. And the Minister of Public Safety in Quebec talked about the money that will make that region safer. So I know that we've talked, a lot in this committee and in the House about, if we really wanted to impact public safety, we needed to close some of the porousness of our border and provide resources there at our border to impact the illegal smuggling of firearms into this country, and rather than spending the resources going after law-abiding Canadian firearm owners, including Indigenous communities, who are not public safety risks. So how do you see what this Quebec initiative is doing, and any suggestions you may have from your nation and to the federal government on what we need to do to seal up our borders to stop the illegal smuggling of firearms in this country, which is a significant problem as identified by law enforcement across the country?
So in speaking with Minister Mendocino, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I had mentioned that the perspective of the federal government is on the weapon itself as being the killer. And I had made it clear to him that his position on that was different than ours, that we see the person behind the weapon itself. As for the border issue, I think that a more resources and funding should go to investigative approaches to the smuggling ring, if you would call it that, and more education and more funding on the expertise and funding towards policing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Motz.
Oh, that already?
Yeah,
I just got warmed up.
flies.
I just got warmed up, Chair.
Well, maybe you'll get a chance in the next
Okay.
round. I don't know. Anyway, we'll go now to Ms. DeMoff, please. Ms. DeMoff, 6 minutes.
Thank you, and I'd like to begin by thanking both of our witnesses for being with us here today. Your testimony is very important to our work to determine what to do next on assault weapons. My first question is for you, Grand Chief. Well, actually, for both of you. Mr. Motz had mentioned the order in council and that there was an amnesty for Indigenous peoples exercising their Section 35 hunting rights. I'm just wondering if there is something brought forward dealing with an assault weapon ban, would you support something similar that would exclude Indigenous peoples from that ban? So maybe I'll start with you, Chief Lazar, and then we can go to you, Grand Chief.
So in terms of the assault rifle ban, I'm going to be extremely honest. I'm not completely privy to all the different types of weapons that there are listed. I'm not privy to are completely aware or completely understanding of the different types of weapons. However, I would not be able to answer questions like that based on the fact that we have not had the opportunity to consult across the Confederacy, across from the Iroquois Caucus. So answers to that question is required with further consultation.
Okay, thank you. That's fair. I guess maybe if you can take it back. My thinking is that anything that we did would exclude Indigenous peoples who are using their firearms for hunting. So, Grand Chief, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, of course, we need to understand the details behind this, but as I stated in my opening comments, we would support any restriction on high-powered automatic assault weapons that are generally used in military applications, for example. I listed out the common firearms that we utilize in our territory of the Northwest Territories and the Yukon of Canada. And I did that by design so that people can see the types of weapons that we do require to exercise some of our Section 35 rights, but also those that have been enshrined in our modern treaty. With that said, we know our lifestyle and our subsistence harvesting will evolve in accordance with our rights. So what I have declared as the common weapons today, rifles primarily, and shotguns, may change over time, and we just need to be cognizant that any changes in our harvesting practices to keep up with technology and conservation, keeping in mind our subsistence way of life, is not infringed unnecessarily by any future bans on these types of weapons.
Thank you, Grand Chief. I wondered if you could clarify something for me. My colleague, Mr. Lloyd, just tweeted that in your testimony you said the bill is targeting hunting rifles. Does that accurately depict what you said? That's not what I heard.
No, it targets some that we use that we do need to have further discussion and engagement on. But as we understand it, a lot of the weapons and rifles that we use are not mentioned specifically.
Okay, thank you. I wondered if you could expand on red flag for us. We had testimony from women's groups who were opposed to the red flag provisions in the bill, and I noted that you said that you were supportive of them. I myself am supportive of them because it's one more tool that we can offer for women. It's not perfect, but I'm just wondering if you could perhaps expand on that. And if I have time, Chief Lazar, I'll also go to you.
Well, because of the prevalence of subsistence harvesters in our community, there's ease of access to firearms. And when we do have situations of domestic violence, whether it's perpetrated by men or women, it is a concern, especially when you're in northern remote communities with limited police support. And so it is that view, as well as experiences that I am aware of, that some of our people, especially our women, have had when they are in these types of situations, and their health and safety is at immediate risk. There does not seem to be enough action, swift action taken to protect these individuals so that they are not fearing for their lives as they're putting themselves and their children to sleep. And that is the view that we look at this, that it's an automatic rescindment, so that there is the time that is able to have the proper assistance provided to the impacted families and the assailants themselves, because clearly there is something at risk going on that needs to be addressed.
So I only have about 30 seconds left. Chief Lazar, I don't know if you had a chance to look at that provision or not, the red flag provision in the bill.
Okay, so I will answer as brief as possible. I do believe that there is a little bit of give and take in terms of that red flag provision. I know that there's pros and cons. However, when it comes to the systemic racism that we have in policing, there's a lot of issues that need to be fixed before we can consider things like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moff. On y va maintenant.
We're now going to turn to Ms. Michaud. Please go ahead. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for having come before the committee today. It's truly much appreciated. And I'm going to start with Ms. Lazar. I understand from your testimony today and from a press release that you published and also a letter you sent to our chair and to the Minister of Public Safety that you have opinions about the spirit of the bill. There are good and bad impacts. And from what I understand, there will be impacts on your community. So I guess I'm wondering if your position is about G4 and G46 that were withdrawn, or is it about the whole bill?
Essentially about the whole bill. I think it's important if, like I mentioned before, that the lack of consultation is one of our major concerns. So if given the opportunity, we would give you a comprehensive perspective of our lived realities. It would allow your government to balance your perspectives without having an adverse impact of Indigenous peoples being able to hunt and harvest. An opportunity should be required to allow us to deliberate on the common threads between our nations in order to give you a more in-depth description of any special exemption or any required amendments that we would like to have or like to see.
From what I understand, there's been a lack of consultation. You didn't meet Mr. Mendocino, didn't you?
And Mr. Mendocino, that was on February 22nd, 2023. That was, I think, about a week or two after we sent the letter.
Okay. Est-ce que votre
And was your conversation beneficial? Did it provide any clarity, or did it calm any concerns you might have?
It was beneficial in a way that we got to meet face to face. He got to see where we were coming from as a council and not only discuss it with just one individual, but to speak with the whole of the council and to get a little bit of our experience. However, I do not deem that as adequate consultation.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
Si je reviens à la position sur
Now, I'd like to come back to your position on the bill. You were asked questions by my colleague, Ms. Damoff, and you said that perhaps there hasn't been enough information about the list in terms of what is allowable or not, what will be on the banned list, what is acceptable. So I'm just trying to understand, are you against... If you're against the bill, does that mean you're against parts of the bill? Or I'd like just to hear you expand on this somewhat. For example, what firearms exactly will your members use and you'd like to see exempted, for example, from any kind of prohibition? Generally speaking, how do you perceive this list? I understand that not everyone will be happy with this bill, but we're holding these extra meetings in order to try and find solutions, or in order to at least try and do better than the first time. So I'm just wondering if you have any recommendations. Of course, your main message seems to be that there has to be better consultation, especially amongst those who are going to be directly impacted by this bill. But besides that, do you have any specific recommendations to make?
I don't have any specific recommendations to make because we weren't provided an opportunity to be able to delegate or discuss between ourselves as nations to be able to answer that. The governance that we work and the framework that we work in is not necessarily a party kind of governance framework. It's a more consensus-based framework where we all have differing opinions, we all have differing perspectives and realities. And like I said, if given the opportunity, we would be able to have, or given the opportunity for the time, to be coming together and creating that list of exemptions so that we can find the common threads that we can suggest to amend in this bill. So I can't speak on behalf of one person. I am representing the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake, but I cannot speak on behalf of other communities, essentially other Indigenous communities. However, I've been given the go-ahead to speak on behalf of the Iroquois caucus, which feels the same way that I do in regard to the lack of consultation and the lack of timing that we have for consultation. It requires a lot of time and a lot of energy that I'm sure that governments usually don't have the... or that I've witnessed they don't have the patience for, or the understanding that there's a lot of different factors to consider in terms of that.
Je vous remercie. Je terminerai peut-être en...
Thank you. Perhaps I can ask you about something else that caught my eye in your letter. You said...
on the shoulders of the peacekeepers who safeguard our territory and will increase the potential for discriminatory and over-policing of our people of territory. Pourriez-vous...
Could you expand on that, please? Could you tell us about the extra work that might impose on your peacekeepers?
So as I've mentioned, we do have hunting territory that is in the Laurentians, about an hour away from our community. So the peacekeepers are our entrusted enforcement for the community of Kahnawake as well as Jawarodu. So we have to travel an hour away in order to get to that territory. However, within that hour, if you start criminalizing some of, like, enforcing the gun restrictions, that hour from Kahnawake to Jawarodu is an hour that someone is risking when they bring up their weapons to that hunting territory. An hour that they're risking. So we have our own jurisdiction in Kahnawake. That jurisdiction applies to Jawarodu, but there is, because of colonization, because of developments, that we are separated an hour away and that we are not connected to that territory, and we cannot hunt in our territory as well.
Thank you. Merci, Madame Michaud.
Thank you, Ms. Michaud.
Mr. Julian. Mr. Julian, go ahead, please. 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses, Grand Chief, Chief Lazare. You're offering valuable testimony today that I think will help our committee look to tracing a path forward. And I'd like to start with you, Chief Lazare, just to understand the issue of the lack of consultation that you flagged in your presentation. You said that you'd met with the minister on February 22nd. Prior to that, was the Mohawk Council, was the Iroquois caucus consulted in any way about this legislation? And if not, okay.
No, it's okay.
Yep. And if not, when was the last time there was any approach from the federal government on firearms legislation?
None that I'm aware of right now. I am new to the Iroquois caucus, so I am still getting briefed on the different files that they've taken on, but based on the previous discussions, they're not necessarily addressing Bill C-21 or haven't been addressed for Bill C-21 as of yet.
So prior to February 22nd, there just was no consultation. The federal government didn't come to you in any way, either the council or the caucus, to ask your views on the legislation? Okay. You have spoken very eloquently about the amendments and the NDP certainly shared your concerns about the amendments. We pushed procedurally to have them withdrawn. Now, on the principle of the bill around the handgun freeze, is that a position that either the Mohawk Council or the Iroquois caucus have taken around the principle of a freeze on handguns?
No.
Okay, so you have no position on that?
No.
Okay, that's very good to know. Thank you. I wanted to come back to the issue of transporting firearms from your community and the issue of the impacts on peacekeepers as well. Is it your impression that the way firearms legislation is implemented currently, that it makes it difficult for law enforcement, in this case the peacekeepers, to actually enforce the legislation?
Yes and no. It's difficult to explain that we have jurisdiction over our community and that we have exemptions within our community. It is difficult to, I don't know how to word this, to be honest. It's a yes and no answer. It's very, for the peacekeepers, they are community members as well. They are hunters as well. But to manage what happens as soon as somebody leaves our territory, it leaves Kahnawake, say to go to Jawarodu, say to go to another nation's territory or another hunting ground as a guest of that nation, it's out of the hands of the peacekeepers.
Yeah, okay.
So there are challenges, but within the community of Kahnawake, the peacekeepers are understaffed and they are underfunded in order to be able to execute what needs to be done.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd like to move on to the Grand Chief. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to ask the same question around consultation. Was the Gwich'in Council consulted in any way prior to the legislation coming forward, or prior to the amendments coming forward, or after the amendments were tabled?
Before the amendments, no. After, yes. We had one meeting with Minister Mendocino at the end of January.
Okay. But prior to that, there was no consultation. Thank you for that. I'd like to ask you the same question in terms of the principles of the bill around the freeze on handguns. Does the Gwich'in Council have a position on that? You've raised some very valuable additional testimony that I'd like to come back to, but on the principle of the bill itself, the handgun freeze, do you have a position?
Well, we struggle to see why anyone would need handguns in our territory other than for crime-related purposes.
So you'd broadly be supportive of the handgun freeze?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. In your testimony, you pointed to the weaknesses of the amendments, certainly, and I think that's something that we've come to a consensus on as a committee. But you also mentioned the issue of exemptions, and could you give us a sense of what you feel the exemptions should look like, what it would affect, what your overall approach or the approach of the Gwich'in Council would be in terms of an exemption on this legislation?
Well, we're of the view it could be a somewhat slippery slope. So the reason we have provided this testimony is to indicate specifically which models of firearms that we want to ensure is not on such a list, such that we don't need an exemption, that these firearms are not on any list that is restricted by the Government of Canada for those that have been approved or licensed to be able to have them. That's our position.
Okay, Mr. Chair, you're going to give me an extension. That's
Sorry.
great. No, I'd be more than pleased. Or are you cutting me off?
I was cutting you off, but I was muted. I had all this eloquent stuff where I thanked you and all, but I was muted, so you're going to be missing that. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Julian. We'll go now. We'll start our second round with Mr. Shipley. 5 minutes, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, point of order.
On a point of order, go ahead.
Given the time, are we doing full rounds, or are we going to truncate?
I think this will be an abbreviated round. I think we'll have 4 slots, one for each party. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Shipley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for witnesses for being here today. My first question is going to be for Chief Lazar. Lazar, the Minister of Public Safety recently had some meetings with your community, and it was reported in the local media on February 24th. There was some quotes from a member of your community, Bobby Patton. Not sure if you're familiar with that gentleman or not, but you're nodding your head yes. I'm going to read these because I don't want to misquote him, because this is really interesting what he quoted here, and I'll ask your comments on them. This was what Mr. Patton said. "It's not like hunting back in the olden days where animals were plentiful, easy to get." He noted the hunting grounds have shrunk as development has intensified and populations have grown, increasing the need for efficiency in hunting. "If you want to go out and you want to kill one goose, one shot, one kill perfect," he said, invoking those who are hunting for sport. However, he insists that goose hunters targeting the animals for sustenance depend on more aggressive weapons to yield enough meat. "They all depend on their semi-automatic weapons. One shot you're not going to get much from," he said. "It's going to limit the amount of harvest it's going to bring back to the community, to the people. It's going to lead to a lot of people probably starving," said Mr. Patton. Could you elaborate on that? That's quite a comment by Mr. Patton, that people will be starving.
So a lot of our community members are trying to go back to their original ways, or our original ways, and a lot of our community members do live off of the hunting game that they are successfully hunt. So there's moose meat, deer meat, there's geese that I know of that I've tried, and the rest that I haven't tried. There's beaver, there's so many different, so many different game that are used for sustenance. And a lot of families do rely on that. They prefer not to go to the local IGA. They prefer not to go to the local metro or local grocery stores. They prefer to hunt and harvest their own game and their own produce their own produce within their gardens and greenhouses.
Thank you for that. Obviously, it would be quite an impact if, I know it's been rescinded and taken back, but if these amendments went through, it's very tough to think that people could potentially be starving because of this incident. Not my quote, my members across, that was actually the Bobby Patton, the member of this community. So you can laugh and comment all you want, but you can call him if you want. So my second question is for the Grand Chief. Grand Chief, you mentioned that you're for the handgun ban. I just want to get some clarification. We had the Fur Institute of Canada in a meeting, and we've heard from other trappers also, that trappers use quite often for their own safety handguns. Do they not use them up in your area? We're hearing conflicting reports on this.
No, the use of handguns, especially those that are trapping, is not common.
It's not common, but is it used at all? We had heard that safety issues because they're carrying so much gear. They went into great depth of detail on it, that they needed to have a handgun on them for many times for safety reasons. You've never heard of that up in your area?
Being raised by a trapper and uncles who were trappers, and myself being raised in a traditional camp, I have never seen a handgun utilized by our people for that purpose.
Well, thank you for that. I'd like to go back to Ms. Lazar. Ms. Lazar, in December, the Assembly of First Nations unanimously passed a resolution to publicly oppose Bill C-21 on the basis that amendments introduced by the government could potentially criminalize long guns or rifles used by First Nation peoples in exercising their Aboriginal treaty rights to sustenance, hunt, and harvest. Do you share these concerns?
Absolutely.
And Grand Chief, do you also share these concerns?
Can I get you just to reiterate the question again?
I was just asking if you agree with the Assembly of First Nations unanimously passing the resolution to oppose Bill C-21.
No, we are not in agreement with that resolution.
Could you explain why that is?
For the reasons that I outlined in my testimony, we believe that this legislation is required, and we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We certainly need some consultation on this, but there are some interesting components and aspects of this legislation, particularly those around handguns, restrictions around those, and the red and yellow flag conditions, as well as a lot of the rifles that are listed on the proposed legislation.
20 seconds, sir.
20 is not really enough to ask a question, so I'll pass that along. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. We'll go now to Mr. Nur Mohammed. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for making time to be with us today. Chief Lazar, I'd like to start with you. Can you share with us what the impact of the 2020 OIC was on your community? The Order in Council, the 2020 Order in Council?
Sorry, there's so many acronyms in my job, I just forget what they are. So the impacts, I cannot reiterate this enough, that there is extreme systemic racism in policing. And when you don't train the officers federally or provincially with the rights of Indigenous peoples, those rights get overlooked. On an individual basis, in real life practice, when an individual from my community or any Indigenous community is stopped and trying to exercise their right, the officer at hand is not trained properly on how to deal with that matter, is not aware of that matter, and is not informed of that matter.
What I'm trying to understand, though, and I agree with you, I think it's really important that all our law enforcement are well aware of the challenges that your communities face. What I'm trying to understand, though, is given that there was the carve-out specifically for Indigenous communities in the OIC, in the Order in Council in 2020, I'm trying to understand what the specific impact, if any, was on your community. And if there wasn't one, then I guess the question I would ask is, would a similar carve-out be helpful to you in any future, or in C-21, for example?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so what I'm trying to understand is if, given that there was a specific carve-out in the Order in Council in 2020 that protected the rights of Indigenous communities to continue to hunt, would something like that in C21 not address your concerns, given hopefully that there was no impact from 2020?
No.
So it wouldn't. So I'm trying to understand that if there was no impact in 2020, why would a similar provision now cause concern?
There is an impact. I don't know how to explain this. I'm sorry, I'm tripped up for words, but there is an impact in terms of the awareness. I know you're saying that the enforcements are aware. They're aware of our struggles. They're aware of the challenges. They are not properly educated and they are not properly trained.
Okay, no,
that's the challenge. You can say all you want. You can put it in legislation that there's exceptions. When it comes into practice, that's where the challenge really lies.
So the issue is in the implementation of the legislation.
Implementation and also the resources.
Got it. Okay. So, okay, that's helpful to know because I think it helps us understand some of the challenges around this. Grand Chief, if I can ask you the same question, what were the concerns or what were the impacts on your community following the 2020 Order in Council, if any?
I'm not aware of any impacts.
And would if there were a similar carve-out or a similar exemption for Indigenous communities in C21, how would you feel about that? Would that be helpful?
Well, I think we need to understand the weapons that have been identified. And as I stated earlier, for this to be proper legislation, we would need to discuss what these potential exemptions would be. And from our perspective, we could certainly share the rifles and the shotguns that we typically use by our people, such that there is no need for an exemption and that they are not on the prohibited listing.
And, in your answer to my friend Mr. Shipley, you had talked about the importance of making sure that this legislation did get passed. You used the term, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think you're right. I think all of us recognize that there is there was room for improvement. And I think that is a very, very important premise for why we are having the conversations. Can you explain to us why, for your community, this legislation is important and why it's important for us to not throw the baby out with the bathwater and come to a good outcome?
Well, we're starting to see an increased prevalence of drugs and illicit activity in our communities. Like a lot of Indigenous communities across the country, gangland violence is a concern. And some of the weapons that have been listed on this potential legislation are often carried by these individuals. They are used to incite fear, intimidation, and ultimately compliance amongst our people. So looking forward into the future, any legislation that looks to restrict some of these assault automatic weapons that are typically military in nature need to be removed, because as we look towards things like potential self-government for our Gwich'in region, we need our police forces to be able to have the equipment and the weaponry to be able to combat some of these criminals.
Thank you, Mr. Nur Mohammed. C'est à vous maintenant, Madame.
Ms. Michaud, you have 2.5 minutes now. Thank you very much, Chair. And Grand Chief, I'm going to pose questions to you now. You spoke about high-capacity, semi-automatic firearms. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
I think at least 90% of the listing of some of the rifles that have been listed on the proposed legislation, there's many of them on there. Not going to get into specifics at this particular juncture, but I said assault-style automatic weapons. And we do use some semi-automatic rifles, as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, and I want to be clear of the delineation between the fully and the semi-automatic weapons.
Donc, ce serait les armes semi-automatiques.
So we're talking about the ones that you would like exempted would be the ones that you commonly use for hunting then?
OK. Merci. Vous avez mentionné également dans...
You also said in your opening remarks that you support a buyback program for prohibited firearms. were you referring to assault-style firearms or handguns or both? Because I know that the government promised to implement a military-style firearm buyback program, but we're not aware of anything involving handgun buyback. So in terms of a buyback program, would you want that to apply to assault-style weapons as well as handguns?
The buyback would only be in force for a lot of the rifles that have been prohibited or deemed prohibited under potential legislation that are used for subsistence harvesting by our people. There will be some instances where individuals are in possession of restricted firearms if the previous Bill C-21 was to be passed. It is in those instances that we would look at a buyback program.
Est-ce que quand le gouvernement vous a
When the government ended up consulting you, I believe you said it was on the 31st of January that you met Minister Mendicino, was this discussed, a buyback program?
Yes, it was, along with other leaders from across the Northwest Territories. There was at least a couple that had mentioned support for this type of a program.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you.
To Mr. Julian. Mr. Julian, you have the hammer. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Grand Chief, I'd like to follow up on Madame Michaud's questions around the buyback. You'd mentioned in your testimony, and I'm paraphrasing you, but basically important to have a properly done buyback program. Was it discussed with the minister, or does the Gwich'in Council or yourself, do you have recommendations around how a buyback program should be structured so that it meets the needs of Indigenous peoples?
Not at this time, and can be the focus of some of our discussions on continued consultation on this potential legislation.
Okay, thank you. You'd also mentioned the issue of gangland violence, which is something that we're facing everywhere. We've seen a marked increase, and law enforcement has seen a marked increase in the use of ghost guns, untraceable. 3D printers can put them together. Using firearm components, they can produce a deadly weapon that is untraceable. Do you have concerns about the use of ghost guns? And is this something that you feel the government should be taking more seriously as well?
Well, I'm not particularly familiar with ghost guns. I'm only hearing about them recently. But nothing really surprises me anymore with the artillery that's being used by those that are perpetrating the drug that do operate in the drug world and are making its way into our northern and remote communities.
Yeah, but you have locally you have seen some of the same concerns raised, or you've actually seen a production of ghost guns or the sale of ghost guns in the same way that in some of our regions of the country we've seen a marked increase, and this is certainly something law enforcement has flagged as well. So is it something that is of concern to you?
Not at this time.
Okay. You'd mentioned as well the issue, I've only got a few seconds, but the military-style weapons. Do you believe the manufacturers should also bear some responsibility when it comes to these types of weapons being present in Canada?
Yeah, I think, as I stated earlier, there's clearly a need for broad-based consultation with all Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and that includes manufacturers who are stakeholders to this legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. So that wraps up our questioning for this panel. I would like to thank our witnesses, Grand Chief Kikavicic.
There you go.
We'll bring you back and I'll practice more. Kikavicic, thank you, and Chief Lazare, thank you very much for your time today. And for helping us in our study. And with that, we will suspend and we're going to bring in the next panel. Thank you.
Let's see.
So welcome to our new panel. So with us today by video conference, we have as an individual, Ms. Linda Keiko, Olympian. We were supposed to have Dr. Simon Chapman. However, he had some difficulty with his equipment and is not going to be able to participate. He will send a brief, I understand. We also have from the Fédération Québécoise des Chasseurs et des Pêcheurs, Monsieur Marc Renaud, President, Madame Émilie Vallée, Communications Coordinator. So each group will have up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, and after which we will start our questions. We'll start now. I would invite Ms. Keiko to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Linda Keiko. I'm a two-time Olympian in the sport of pistol shooting. I'm also the president of the Alberta Handgun Association, which is an organization that fosters and promotes the ISSF, otherwise known as Olympic, style of competitions. I come from a family of Olympians in pistol shooting. Both my father and one of my sisters were both Olympians. I am very grateful for this opportunity to appear before the committee today. However, I'm also very angry and I'm also sad. I'm angry that my tax dollars are being wasted on policy that doesn't increase public safety. I'm angry that no matter how well I follow the laws keep changing, and the law changes are impacting me directly and people like me. I take great pride in representing my country on the world stage, as do all athletes, and I'm sad that due to the handgun ban, the Order in Council, C-71, and this proposed legislation, that I will not be able to represent Canada on the world stage, that athletes who come after me won't even have an opportunity to compete, as they will have no access to competition firearms. I am angry that this government has no concern for actual safety, because if there was concern for safety, if there was actual effort made to increase public safety, I likely would not be here as a witness. And that because of your measures, because if you had interests of public safety in mind, the measures that you did would not affect me as a vetted firearms owner. Your measures would then affect criminals. None of that I could see of that's being proposed in C-21 or the withdrawn amendments made measurable improvements for public safety. Criminals have criminal behavior, and no matter what the law says, criminals will continue doing what they do. Instead of reducing crime, your handgun bans, Order in Councils, and efforts to virtue signal that you're doing something increase my paperwork by 6 weeks to represent Canada on the world stage. I now pay the government for the privilege of returning home with my guns, which are my property, on every return home to Canada. The extra paperwork I do does not make you, my community, or my children safer than they were before your measures were put into place. But it is a waste of my tax dollars. Instead of preparing to compete against my peers from the Ukraine, Greece, South Korea, France, among many others, I'm doing paperwork for the privilege of not being arrested or having my competition equipment confiscated at the border when I return home. These measures also remove any opportunity I have to take up hunting, something that my father did, that is inherently a Canadian tradition. Not only do I need to have my PAL, I need to take a hunter safety course and plan out details of where I would hunt. Banning semi-automatic rifles removes this opportunity. Almost all hunters use semi-automatic rifles with the same magazine capacity as my competition handgun. The course that PAL holders are required to take on top of hunter education courses make hunters and competitive shooters safer with firearms than the majority of the population. I am constantly having my background checked as a PAL holder. I have small children. Firearm safety is so very important to me. My firearms are not a public safety threat, and neither am I, nor are my teammates, my family, and my friends. The measures that this government is taking will destroy competitive shooting sports in Canada, and there are so many more than just the narrow few that make it to the Olympics, and it will destroy our hunting culture to provide for our own families. As Canadians, we are all proud to see a Canadian competing on the world stage, bringing home a medal. That will end in the shooting sports because of the bans put already into place or that are currently being proposed. Removing a tool does not decrease violence. My sports equipment, my hunting tools are not a public safety threat. Thank you very much.
We can hear you right now, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Keiko. We go now to the Fédération québécoise des chasseurs et des pêcheurs.
Mr. Marc Renaud, President, please go ahead for 5 minutes. I heard the sound cut off. Did you say it's my turn?
Oui, c'est à vous.
Yes, it is your turn. Thank you then. I'm speaking to you today as president of the Quebec Federation of Hunters and Anglers, a non-profit organization whose mission includes representing hunters and anglers and promoting safe practices. Our educational subsidiary, Sécurité Nature, is the provincial government's agent for the delivery of hunter education and the Canadian Firearms Safety Course. Each year, approximately 60,000 participants take our courses. Because we have been teaching safe firearms handling since 1994, when the course was created, we have always focused on education and prevention rather than gun control. We ourselves become involved by going above and beyond our training obligations by implementing safe gun handling awareness campaigns. We've also provided hunters with a website dedicated to gun transportation and storage methods, as well as other actions such as trigger lock distribution. Our overall position on gun control is to limit constraints to legitimate owners, hunters, or sport shooters who are trained and licensed to possess and acquire guns. In response to the concerns about the amendments to Bill C-21 made last November, we raised two main issues. The first is that the amendments as proposed were not clear enough. And the confusion created by the definition of assault weapons and the list of prohibited weapons demonstrates that the control measure didn't hit the right target. Law-abiding hunters and sport shooters felt a great deal of concern, and rightly so. They felt concerned about these prohibition methods that had the potential to include their weapons, which they have used for years for safe and legal activities. The second problem is the lack of public knowledge about firearms, which colors political decisions made about guns. There's evidence that aesthetic and ergonomic criteria are taken into account when placing weapons on the prohibited weapons list, rather than objective criteria based on the weapon's capacity. Furthermore, semi-automatic weapons are seen as military weapons by some, whereas this mechanism is necessary for certain types of hunting. It should be remembered that magazine capacity is already regulated, and in general the limit is 5 rounds, whereas in the specific case of migratory bird hunting, the limit is 3 under federal law. We would like to see Canadian regulations that truly target criminals rather than criminalize legitimate firearm owners. The first step would be to create a definition of assault weapon based on objective criteria and not on the style of weapon. And that definition, if accepted by the majority of the hunting and shooting community, should then be applied retroactively to all prohibited weapon schedules. Then it would finally be possible to stop working from constantly revised lists, which is a way of doing things that causes anxiety and confusion. So in summary, we strongly believe in education and prevention to promote safe gun behavior. Our members also want to feel safe, and they want the laws that are added to improve public safety to be aimed at the right targets. Hunters and sport shooters who comply with training and licensing requirements are not that target. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you.
Questions now? with Ms. Dancho. Ms. Dancho, please go ahead. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, merci to both witnesses for being with us today. Greatly appreciate your testimony. We have a sports shooting perspective here in this panel and a hunting perspective, so it's very, very good to hear from both of you. Ms. Keiko, I have a few questions for you concerning your experience. We know, of course, the Liberals have brought forward successive gun bans, certainly began with C-71 and the May 2020 OIC that was subsequently added to with hundreds of models. We then saw the so-called handgun freeze, which we know is a long-term ban, and now the latest ban, which is certainly one of the largest hunting rifle bans in Canadian history. And so now we're talking about that since it's been withdrawn. But what I hear from sport shooters and from hunters is that they feel that they are being punished and attacked. And I'm wondering, as an Olympian who's represented Canada as a sport shooter on 2 occasions, and from a family of Olympic sport shooters, I'm wondering if you can share your experience on the impact these successive bans have had on you.
I would say definitely there's a direct impact on competitive shooters specifically. Again, I didn't used to have to do a whole stack of extra export and import paperwork to be able to leave the country and come back in the country with my own firearms that are registered within this country, that they have already been imported. I now pay to import them every time I come back and back home from a competition. I do know one of my teammates is trying to look into avenues to acquire a new competition firearm and is receiving significant challenges. So essentially, like, new equipment comes on the market and it has new technology, better equipment, better competition, better performance, and we are now going to be banned from that. We're going to have significant challenges, if at all possible, to be able to acquire those. There's only a very few importers who will even take on the challenge of trying to work through the rules to be able to find those exemptions where they're listed for Olympians. However, being an Olympian is one thing. I mean, I'm the only pistol Olympian that has attended the last 2 Olympics. If we're only talking about supporting Olympians, you're talking about supporting me, and that's about it. It means that you ban all of my teammates who are looking to make the Olympics. If we're talking about Olympic sports, there's a huge amount of people who are involved in these sports, but now we're shutting down the opportunities to participate in those sports. We're refusing people even the access to the equipment to be able to even try it. So I see it as a significant impact.
Thank you very much. And just more on that, I think, perhaps folks that aren't familiar with firearms at all, maybe they think that all guns are just created equal. They're all the same. A gun's a gun, but certainly that's absolutely not the case. And anyone who's used firearms at all would know that. And to your point, this is a vital tool, obviously, to competing at the Olympic level. We also have IPSC and other international competitive bodies and national competitive bodies. So to your point, if you're not able to sort of hold the firearm before you buy it, if you're not able to buy new parts for it, or it's very difficult to do so, to me this really seems like it will certainly be an elimination of competitive sports shooting in Canada, something that's been around for a very long time, and certainly the Conservatives are very proud of to see you, Ms. Keiko, as an Olympian representing us on the world stage. So given these restraints, do you feel that there will be any more Olympians following you, or what is the impact this is going to have on Olympic and competitive sports shooting in Canada?
Considering how hard it is to make the Olympics to begin with, I mean, we're talking, I mean, at any Olympic Games, there's maybe 300 athletes in the entire country that actually make the Olympic Games. So we're talking about a very small amount of people to begin with. So when we're talking about shooting sports, I mean, you cut off the access to be able to produce Olympian, you need a huge mass of amount of people competing in who push each other to do better, to strive for better achievements, for better performances. And if you cut off the access to the competition, the training, the teammates, you essentially obliterate any opportunity we have of putting an Olympian into the Olympics, let alone onto the podium. You need the opportunity, you need the training and availability.
And you had mentioned a few countries that compete at the Olympic level in sports. I mean, there's many of them, but can you just list off a few of the top competitors in the world on sports shooting?
Some of the top competitors, off the top of my head, there's definitely in my event specifically, we've got the Ukraine, we've got Greece, we've got South Korea. There's definitely, like China's going to be in there as well. Some of the other ones that are kind of in the top list are probably escaping me.
Yeah, thank you.
Throughout the European, France as well.
France and Germany. Yeah, thank you very much. So Canada will no longer be able to compete, in essence, against those other countries that are certainly supported by their governments, unlike ours. It's very disappointing, and certainly Conservatives are very proud that you have competed at the Olympic level and represented Canada with such pride and integrity. So I just want to put that on the record, how proud we are of you, Ms. Keiko, for what it's worth. And just to conclude, a few other things. My understanding is, out of all the Olympic sports, actually sports shooting is one of the safest ones. And as well, as you mentioned, you yourself are not a violent person, yet you're being treated like you are. So just in our concluding half a minute, can you just comment on a few of those things?
Yeah, I think there was a study that was done in 2016, and I actually looked up. There's a new one that was actually done in 2020 as well, that literally listed off statistics of injuries in different events and different sports. And surprise, surprise, shooting doesn't have any, which I think is a huge testament to the safety culture that we have in shooting sports. That it's a safety culture. We're always going to be safe, and we're not going to have those injuries or incidents that are going to be there. So there are studies that are available that actually prove that point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Dancho. We'll go now to Mr. Moff. Mr. Moff, please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Keiko, for joining us again and providing us with your testimony. I had a few questions about Olympic participation. You participate in the Summer Olympics, and then we also have Olympians who participate in Winter Olympics in the biathlon. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So of the athletes who attend, the first Olympics we went to was in 1908. How many participate in pistol shooting with you?
Since 1908, I
don't
have the number in front of me.
That's okay. That's okay. But how many go to the Olympics with you when you go?
So the last two Olympics, I was the only pistol shooter. Previous to that, in 2012, there was only one pistol shooter as well. I think that we've had a pistol shooter in the Olympics every Summer Olympics. I'm going to say since at least probably the early 80s, when they kind of split off men and women's events. They've definitely had women in every event, I think, since 1984. There was even a gold medal at the 1984 Olympics in women's pistol shooting. There's also been a long history of male pistol shooters as well. We have, since they changed the rules for how we qualify, there's been smaller shooting teams, I think, since 1996, based on how qualifications work. But prior to that, there was a significant shooting teams across the rifle, the pistol, and the shotgun disciplines that are available within the shooting sports. And I think I could be wrong, but we've been participating as Canada in shooting sports since the early 1900s for sure.
The numbers I got were 16 in pistol shooting and 84 with long guns. So we're not talking about a lot of people here, but there is an exemption for elite Olympic shooters like yourself, is there not?
Sure there is, but how do you become an elite pistol shooter without training? How do you become an elite pistol shooter? Do you just come off the street and say, you know what, I think I'm going to be an Olympic volleyball player today? It takes years of training. It takes years of work and effort to put into it. There's the rule of about 10,000 hours to become an expert in anything, and yet we're going to limit the people who are allowed to have an exemption to the people who are already champions, who are already winning, who are already Olympians. That means that you get rid of the entire sport. How do you prove that you want to become a professional or Olympian in something before you actually can prove that you are?
But what we're talking about is 16 people in the entire country, and right now it's just you.
You're talking about 16 people who become Olympians. Do you understand how many other people who are competing against them? There's a huge amount of people competing against them. We have teams. I have teammates that I train with all the time who have not made the Olympic level yet, but yet you're going to restrict their equipment to say that they can never achieve? That makes no sense. It's like telling soccer players that you want to be a soccer player, but you have to be an Olympic soccer player before you can actually have a ball. That's what you're saying.
Not. I mean, gun ranges are still allowed to import, buy, and sell, import and buy I think, at some point, we as a society need to decide which is more important. And with all just, and I do commend you for representing your country, and I thank you for doing that. But we also need to look at, as a society, whether handguns are something that we want to see continue to proliferate in our country, and make the decision that you will still have the ability to use them, Ms. Keiko, but our government has determined that we would like to see a handgun freeze, and that is supported by the vast majority of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. So I think, anyway, I'll leave it there because I do want to ask a question to our other witness. Is there, I know that you had concerns about the amendment with the list of models that was put forward. Do you know, is there a definition that you think would be helpful in terms of the government if we were to introduce an amendment? I better get my earpiece. For Monsieur Renaud.
Oui, merci. Puis moi...
Thank you. And I'll pass the question on to Ms. Lavallée. She's the head of communications. She's in a better position to answer you. Currently, there isn't a definition that we have to propose. What we're asking is that objective criteria be set in order to be able to build that kind of definition, and to be able, and that will include sports shooters and hunters, so that that definition is very clear. So we don't necessarily have a final definition to give you ourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moff. On y va maintenant.
We'll now move on to Ms. Michaud. Ms. Michaud, go ahead. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Renaud, Ms. Lavallée. Thank you for coming today. I know that hunters in Quebec were very pleased that you were able to provide this testimony. Now, in your opening remarks, Mr. Renaud, you were very clear. You said that there were two main problems. First, that the amendments were not clear enough, that is to say G4 and G46. And you also said that there was a lack of knowledge on the part of the public when it came to the categories of firearms. You feel that the criteria that are set or the principles that are used should be objective rather than those that are rather ergonomic in nature. And I'm thinking the same. Is there another way of classifying firearms? Francis Langlois, who's a professor, a university professor, proposed something that was rather interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with this way of classifying firearms, or it would be based on how they're handled, and as well as how they are fired. So there would be handguns, there are long guns when it comes to the handling, and then in terms of the actual shooting mechanism, there are automatic and manual firearms. So perhaps if we were to use a different definition, it would be easier for the public to understand exemptions and prohibitions. I'm just wondering if you have an opinion on this. I suggested that we consult what Mr. Langlois has said. So even if the bill is drafted in a particular way, I think it would be interesting to explore this way of classifying firearms. And that way, if there are firearms that are used for hunting, that are commonly used throughout Canada, let's say, for example, the SKS. Let's say we're talking about firearms that were originally for military purposes, but that could be used for hunting. Maybe this would allow us to figure out how it could be classified without necessarily putting it into a military category. For example, taking the SKS as an example again. So a way of kind of avoiding of putting all firearms in one basket. Well, perhaps I'll attempt a response and then Ms. Vallée can help me. There already are restricted and non-restricted firearms. So I'm wondering about making amendments clearer. You know, there are firearms that are designed as military or high-capacity guns. There is already a limit to 5 rounds, for example, on guns used for hunting. Now, if objective criteria are used, it would allow the hunters to have a better understanding. They would actually feel more secure in their choices. Because if the amendments are too complicated, then it makes our hunters anxious. There are firearms that are sold in Canada, and they are limited in how many rounds they can have. But perhaps Emily could speak to what you raised regarding the person you quoted about a way of classifying firearms. Yes, he is suggesting a way of classifying firearms. His proposal is actually based on objective criteria, and that's what we're asking for, objective criteria. So I can't necessarily say I fully support, but he is using objective criteria. So, for example, in the way they're fired, that is very clear. People know what category their firearm is a part of. So we support that kind of criteria. I think that is something to explore further. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Renaud, we both agree on one thing. You say that perhaps not having a list would be simpler. And that's what I actually said to the government. If we have this evergreen definition, so a definition that can evolve, well, that definition should cover firearms that exist already, that will come onto the market eventually. And perhaps then we wouldn't necessarily need to keep everything on a list. The only list that would be updated would be the RCMP's list, but not necessarily the one that's in the criminal code. To have many lists doesn't help understanding on the part of the public. And if you look at G4, prohibiting firearms that have more than 10,000 joules of power, what that means, or what that refers to rather, are firearms that are already prohibited. Thank you. I'll continue later.
An answer, please. Go ahead. You get to answer.
J'avais pas eu le temps.
Well, I hadn't asked a question, Chair.
Je reviendrai plus tard, Monsieur le Président.
Chair, I'll come back to it later. I hadn't really actually asked a question yet.
Sorry, I have this horrible task of cutting people off when their time is up. So we'll go now to, where are we? We'll go now to Mr. Julian. Mr. Julian, go ahead, please. 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. You're doing your job very well. And thank you for giving me my opportunity to speak. I'm dealing with some jet lag. Thank you both for your testimony today. It's very important. And I'd like to start with Mr. Renaud and Ms. Vallée. First, I'd like to congratulate you on the education you provide. Your website is very informative, and you've quoted some numbers. And I want to know if I understood correctly. There are 60,000 participants on a yearly basis in your training? Yes, that's correct. Well, that's very impressive. So given the impact that you make in terms of education that your organization makes in Quebec, I'd like to know this to begin with. Were you consulted when the bill was being drafted or before the amendments were brought forward? And were you consulted once the amendments were tabled? And I'm referring to G4 and G46. We were not consulted regarding the amendments while they were being drafted. When we saw the amendments, we asked to be heard and to be consulted. And that's why we've also said that if there are potential amendments in the future, there has to be consultation of all our members. So how were consultations done then after the fact? You pointed out your opinions about the amendments. The NDP, for example, has worked very hard to have these amendments withdrawn. But what I would like to know how you were contacted. How did the government follow up with you once you indicated that you had a problem with the amendments? Well, Emily is in the best position to answer this. Perhaps she can answer that question. We were contacted by Minister Medicino's team. We had a meeting mid-January. And in mid-January, when you had this meeting, did you speak about or present this idea of more objective criteria? And did you also raise the two concerns that you raised today in your testimony? For example, the fact that lists aren't clear enough. And did you suggest using objective criteria? Because in your answer to Ms. Michaud, you referred to other criteria that could be used. Was that spoken about? Did you discuss that during your meeting? Yes, we did. However, we first had to ask many questions so that we could actually understand the amendments, to make sure that we fully understood the impact of the definitions being used, and also so that we could find out what had been added in November 2022. So the purpose of the meeting was to better understand what was being done. Now, if I put myself in the shoes of hunters and sports shooters, well, they didn't attend that meeting. And so it's easy to understand how impossible it would be for them to feel reassured at all about any amendments. So we had an opportunity to get answers to our questions, yes, and then to also raise the issue of a definition that had to be clearer, and that the term assault firearms shouldn't necessarily lead to further confusion. And if a definition is accepted after proper consultation, then it has to apply to the entire schedule, to all firearms that have already been prohibited. So if there's an understanding of what that means, then we won't necessarily have to keep working with lists. Was it your impression that the government was trying to convince you about these amendments? Is that why you spent the first part of your meeting mostly discussing how these would actually work? Well, the purpose of the meeting was not to convince anyone. I think it truly was to seek clarity and to ask our opinion. So it was an open discussion on what potentially a definition could include when it comes to assault firearms. And then after that meeting, did the government promise to consult you after, in the future? Well, afterwards, they responded in writing to some of the questions that we had that were outstanding. But there was no further scheduling of anything except our testimony here before this committee. How many members do you have? 125,000. And there are 220 associations throughout Quebec that are members, besides all the other community partners. So we are quite an umbrella organization. And out of that, how many are
So that wraps up our first round, and we will go now into our second round. We will start with Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd, please go ahead. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question's to the Quebec hunters and anglers.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lloyd, just before you can carry on, this will be a shortened round as well. There'll be one slot for each party, as last time. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
To the Quebec hunters and anglers, Minister Mendicino noted in a previous meeting that he's very concerned with the number of Canadians who are taking safety courses and becoming licensed firearm owners. Do you share the Minister Mendicino's concerns that people who are taking your courses and becoming licensed firearm owners pose a threat to public safety?
I'm not sure I understood your question. If I understood, you're asking if the minister is worried about the number of people, or if you're worried, or if I'm worried about the number of people taking safety courses. No. It means that Canadians want to safely use firearms. So no, on the contrary.
You know, it might surprise folks at the committee to learn that I already think there is an evergreen definition of assault firearms in this country. And that definition has been in place for a number of decades. Firearms that are fully automatic, that carry high-capacity magazines of more than 5 rounds, are already illegal in this country. Are you aware of that? Is that something that you're aware of? Quebec hunters?
Yes. We're aware of that. There are prohibited firearms, and there are high-capacity assault firearms that are prohibited.
Sport shooters do not have access to these kinds of firearms, assault weapons, today. Is that correct?
C'est correct, effectivement.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, they're illegal.
Government's evergreen definition that they proposed, they said, quote, a firearm that is a rifle or shotgun that is capable of discharging centerfire ammunition in a semi-automatic manner that is designed to accept a detachable cartridge magazine with a capacity greater than 5 cartridges of the type for which the firearm was originally designed. Now, I think you and I can agree that we already know in Canada it's illegal to have a magazine that carries more than 5 rounds, but when this amendment says any firearm that is capable of taking a magazine over 5 rounds, we're talking about a lot of semi-automatics here. Are we talking about a lot of hunting rifles and shotguns that would be banned by this amendment? Do you agree with that conclusion?
On peut pas parler d'un.
Well, we can't necessarily. Anything that's semi-automatic, it doesn't necessarily have to refer to the 5 rounds. There is a risk that some of the firearms that are used, yes, could be included. And that's why we're asking actually for clarity in these amendments. We want them to be more specific.
Yeah. Yes, and that's what my concern about the evergreen definition that the Liberals proposed is that it would capture a lot of hunting rifles and shotguns, because even though magazines that carry over 5 rounds or cartridges are illegal in Canada, many of these firearms are designed to take magazines in other countries without these restrictions that would have over 5 rounds. So many commonly used hunting rifles and shotguns would have been banned if this amendment had gone forward. And that's a concern we have when writing an evergreen definition. And why I don't think it's necessary is because we already have an evergreen definition in this country that bans fully automatic select fire firearms, that bans firearms with high-capacity magazines. And this is an evergreen definition that has largely worked, that is politically not divisive in this country overall. And now we're talking about, going after semi-automatic rifles and shotguns that are widely used by hunters, as we've seen from a wide array of testimony. And so how does the government try to come back and narrow this evergreen definition? And I just don't think they are capable of doing it, because any definition is going to be redundant, because it's already going to capture the existing evergreen bans, or it's going to capture a lot of legitimately and commonly used hunting rifles and shotguns. This is going to impact a way of life for so many people. Is this going to impact the way of life for folks who go through your courses and folks who are part of your association? Is that going to impact your way of life should these amendments go through again?
Entièrement d'accord.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. In fact, we were surprised by these amendments because legislation already exists. So that's why it really has to be clarified. If the government comes back with amendments. But I absolutely agree with you. The legislation already exists. Is it necessary?
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. We go now to Mr. Hanley, please.
Thank you. Merci pour.
Thank you for your testimony.
Continue in English, because in this technical category, I'm not as fluent, so forgive me. But for Monsieur Renaud, I've been engaging quite extensively with Yukon hunters, and many of the themes that you relate have been expressed in the Yukon as well. At the same time, I think everyone that I've talked to has agreed that gun violence in Canada is an increasing problem, and that there is more to do in addressing gun violence in this country. And it's a question of which are the avenues that are yet incomplete that we need to complete. I think the point that you made about that you are probably the most safe users, you and others who are members, who have done the training, who have done the PAL, are among the most safe users of firearms in the country, and I think we have to respect that. At the same time, I know when I was last on this committee, I had a chance to talk with your Ontario counterpart and asked about the willingness to engage in the question of how we collaboratively address firearm safety and gun violence in the country. And in your even when you express that you haven't been consulted enough so far, are you willing to be a partner as we move ahead and try to fill in the gaps in gun safety in this country by working with groups who are working on all sides of this issue?
Il est clair.
Clearly, being consulted is very important. And we're very concerned as well with crime. The problem is that we have to be very clear about what we're targeting, because obviously it's not the legitimate owners of firearms who need to be targeted, because that's not where the problem lies. So what needs to be done? Well, if the government wants to work with us as a partner, along with other federations, because there are federations throughout the provinces, if we can help, that's fine. But there's also the whole issue of policing and crime and education. So, as a federation, we are concerned. And that's why we're saying that it's very important to work with and consult hunting communities throughout the country.
Thank you. And just following up, I believe in your opening comments that you said that you were open to a permanent definition, as Madame Michaud has followed up on. I also wanted to follow up on the concept of assault-style weapon. We know that there's that automatic weapons are covered, but there are concerns about trying to arrive at some conclusion around how we define firearms that are potential weapons that are not yet included. And so you said that you were open to a definition, even though you didn't have a criteria yourself to offer. But are there some criteria that you would suggest for how we would arrive at an evergreen definition?
Effectivement, il y a des critères.
Yes, there are criteria that we can suggest, but I should just also say that we're open to creating a definition so that these lists can be removed, because these lists are just going to get longer and longer in subsequent bills, and that's what we want to avoid. So that should be the idea of having a definition so that we can avoid that kind of thing. And that definition could be based on criteria such as those Francis Langlois raised. For example, the charging mechanism, the loading mechanism, or the capacity and the number of rounds that it can contain, or how it's handled, so that handguns, and there can be a distinction between long guns and handguns. So there could be a series of very objective criteria that could be used.
Thank you, Doctor. On y va maintenant.
We'll now move on to Ms. Michaud. Go ahead. You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. So here's what I was trying to say earlier. I was thinking about G4, and I was trying to read it because I expect that you don't have it in front of you. But from what I understood amongst hunters in Quebec, it's that there's a problem with a point G in the amendment. E and F already refer to firearms that are prohibited under the 2020 OIC. H refers to these ghost guns or firearms that are illegally manufactured. And I think we all agree on the need to legislate. E refers to the schedule. And so I'm just going to refer back to what Ms. Vallée just said. That is to say, there shouldn't be long lists. So that should be taken out. But if I go back to G, G refers or referred to semi-automatic firearms. And I think even just the drafting in French led to a lot of confusion. People felt that it meant that all hunting rifles would be banned. But if there were a new definition, if we could just take out this referral in the French version to hunting rifle, do you think that would help? Do you think that would help generally in understanding what is prohibited? Yes, I would say that this notion of hunting firearm or hunting rifle, but I think also perhaps other firearms might be added or covered that aren't used in hunting. So I think we need to talk about the design. There has to be a referral to the design. Perhaps Emily has something to add. Well, just to expand on that, I think the design is important. And one would have to look at the blueprints to know what is prohibited and what isn't, and that would be impossible. And it would be impossible for a regular person to just understand. So we had raised that point actually when we were meeting with the minister. But to come back to your original question, Yes, especially the French version was certainly leading to a fair bit of confusion. I don't know if I have any more time, Chair, but I don't have any more time. Apologies.
Julian, please go ahead. You have the final word. 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to ask Mr. Leno and Ms. Vallée the question that I was asking you earlier when I was cut off by the chair. Now, you referred to 125,000 members. I'd like to know what percentage of those have possession and acquisition licenses. Oh, I couldn't tell you how many have those licenses. That's a federal matter. It's not information that I have. But all those hunters have licenses, and so I would expect most of them have the possession acquisition license because they have to be the owner of the license and the owner of the firearm. But you would say that it's the vast majority, wouldn't you? Yes, I would. Because I just wanted to raise another point that was raised earlier, or rather that has been raised by other people in the community and by police officers, and that's the issue of ghost firearms. There are gaps, deficiencies in the legislation. So people can buy parts, they can buy cartridges, they can even own them. And they don't necessarily need to have one of those licenses to own them. So what that means is that any people with criminal intentions can actually circumvent existing laws. You obviously represent an organization that represents responsible members. You take your responsibilities very seriously through the education that you do every year. So I'd like to know what you and your members potentially think about this increasing phenomena of people managing to acquire these ghost firearms and who are managing to circumvent regulations, that is to say, circumventing the need to have a license. Well, there has to be work with the RCMP. And if a firearm's illegal, well, that's criminal. And so you don't need an amended bill, actually, for hunters and sports shooters if what you're talking about is criminal elements. I mean, that's up to the police, then, to apply the law. Yes. However, the point is that it isn't covered. That problem isn't covered. That law does not exist. Right now, it's legal to buy these parts for firearms without having a PAL. Well, you can legally buy ammunition under current laws. Now, if you have a firearm that has sort of been made bit by bit and it's illegal, well, that's not legal ownership. You can't legally own one of those, and hunters can't either.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. And I'm afraid we have to wrap up at this point. I would like to thank our panel, our witnesses. You've been very helpful. It's a very difficult subject, and we appreciate your time and your expertise. And with that, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all.